Hello everyone, I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. I think my girlfriend is hiding something from me. I've been with my girlfriend Eve for close to a year now, and I gotta say, life has never been this good. She's beautiful, funny, supportive. The list goes on. All I could ever want. But a few weeks ago, I started noticing her acting strangely. I've begun to realize she's hiding something from me. It started one night when we were watching TV. "I'm just gonna get a snack," she said, getting up and going into the kitchen. I smiled at her and carried on watching TV. But a few moments later, I heard her whispering very faintly. Of course, it's not weird for people to talk to themselves. Hell, I do it. But something about it was suspicious. She almost sounded apologetic. In fact, I'm almost certain I heard her whisper the words, "I'm sorry." I got up as quietly as I could and peeked through the door into the kitchen. The window was wide open and she was retreating her hand as though she had just reached outside. "What are you doing?" I asked. She jumped and spun round to face me. "Oh, I was just opening the window," she replied, laughing nervously. I raised an eyebrow. "It's pouring it down out there," I said. "Oh, I know, I'm sorry, I have a headache and I'm feeling stuffy in here," she explained, then just smiled at me and opened the snack cupboard. I went over to the window and looked outside. It was dark and I could see the tall trees of the woods beyond our garden swaying, battered by this relentless summer thunderstorm. I shut the window, frowning, and we both went back to watching TV. I decided not to give too much thought to this unusual event until the next day. It was Saturday, and I woke up at noon. Eve was already up showering, so I went outside for a smoke. I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw that there were muddy footprints on the patio below the kitchen window that went striding off into the grass and heading toward the trees. So there was someone out there last night. I marched back inside and went upstairs to find Eve blow-drying her hair. "What the hell were you doing last night? Who were you talking to?" I demanded, perhaps a little more aggressively than I should have. She looked at me through the mirror with surprise. "What are you talking about? Why are there muddy footprints in our garden? I saw you reaching out of the window last night and I heard you whispering. Who was there? What's going on?" I felt my heart beating intensely. I was mad, but also creeped out. Upon hearing my words, her face turned from confused to irritated with a glimmer of panic. "I don't know what you're talking about." She turned around to face me. "If there are footprints, it's probably from when I put your boots on this morning to take the trash out. The kitchen bin was full." I thought for a moment. "Then why are the muddy footprints in the grass beelining to the damn woods?" I asked. Eve just shrugged. "I thought the neighbor's cat had gotten out again. It looked like it was running off into the trees, so I went after it, but I think it was just a hare," she explained. "Oh, right," I replied, unconvinced. "Sorry. Is she cheating on me with some jackass who tried to see her last night?" I thought to myself. No, that's stupid. Surely, I thought, if there were someone else, he'd be smart enough not to show up at our home late at night and make such a fuss that I'd be sure to notice. Could it have been a plug? Was she buying drugs? My mind raced, but I decided to act cool whilst thinking of a plan to catch her out in whatever funny business she or her mystery visitor decided to conduct next. The next few days were pretty normal. I start and finish work earlier than her, so we don't see each other much until the evening. Normally, I await her on our bed, ready for us to both de-stress after work. But only a few nights after the kitchen incident, anticipating Eve's arrival home, I got a text. "Hey babe, won't be home till 10. Katie and her BF had a fight and she wants me to see her. See you later, love you 3. Part of me wanted to believe this. Katie and Josh were going through a rough patch, I knew that. But part of me didn't believe it at all. I stared at the text for a while. She refused to let anyone have her location, even me, because of a stalky ex she once had. Some guy who disappeared off the face of the earth 2 years ago after she threatened to report him to the police. I had respected this boundary of hers, but at this particular moment it only frustrated me even more. Later on, my eyes pried themselves open to the sound of someone moving around. I had inadvertently fallen asleep earlier. Now it was pitch black. The bedroom door creaked open and Eve came in as quietly as she could. Pretending I was still asleep, I left my eyes open just a crack to observe her. I couldn't see much, but she undressed and got into bed next to me. She smelled earthy like wet leaves. I glanced over at the digital clock on my bedside table. When I saw the time, I felt anger and panic sear through me. It was 4 a.m. Whatever the fuck she had been doing, I was certain she had not been with Katie the whole time. A few hours later, when I got up for work, Eve was fast asleep next to me. Our room was bathed in milky pre-dawn light. Once I had showered and dressed, I was about to leave the house when I noticed something on the floor in front of the porch. Dirt and undergrowth from the woods. Her boots were filthy, so she'd tracked it in last night. What the hell was she doing in the woods at 4 a.m.? I was angry, confused, and slightly afraid. I left, slamming the door in frustration. I needed to figure this out. Later, when I got home from work, I took advantage of my alone time and seized my opportunity to investigate further. I put on my boots and jacket, making my way into the woods to see what I could find. I couldn't shake a very persistent fear in the back of my mind. Of what exactly, I don't know. But I put a little hunting knife in my pocket anyway. The storm had ceased overnight and the late afternoon sun was now sizzling down. Once I got to the bottom of our garden, I peered into the trees. It looked serene enough. Eve and I often go for walks in there because it's such a nice spot. But I was still unnerved. I made my way in, damp foliage rustling under my step, and I looked around vigilantly. In the distance, I could see a large clearing. This was where we sometimes had picnics at midday on the weekend, because the noon sun shines nicely down into it. As I approached, I noticed that there was a circle of rocks with charred bits of wood and ash in the middle. It looked pretty fresh. What was she doing? I asked myself aloud. Having a fucking bonfire? Has she lost her mind? At the edge of the bonfire was a little piece of paper, half burnt with writing on it. I picked it up. June 21st was written on it, followed by something that had succumbed to the fire. Beneath this were handwritten names. Eves was there, followed by a bunch of other names, male and female, that I didn't recognize. As I went to pocket the paper, I noticed another name, one that I did recognize. Katie. June 21st was tomorrow. Was it an invite list? Were these people congregating here again tonight into the early hours of the 21st, having s'mores without me? In June, no less. This was crazy. I had so many questions, but I was too curious to just ask Eve. I wanted to know exactly what was happening. So I decided that if she snuck away tomorrow night to come here again, I'd follow her and catch her in the act. As I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. One of the big trees at the foot of the clearing had a big symbol carved into it. A sun with flickering rays. Beneath it, some words were inscribed. Festum incipiat, it said. Latin, but I didn't know what it meant. Things were getting creepier by the minute. I whipped out my phone and took a photo. When I got back, I decided to look around the house and Eve's belongings for something to try and explain this. She had lots of notebooks and diaries, all filled with mundane work-related things. But in the wardrobe, in a shoebox, I found a leather-bound book I hadn't seen before. On the cover was a golden symbol, the same sun symbol I had seen earlier. Inside, on old yellowed paper, the title page had the same Latin inscription I'd seen before. Festum incipiat. Reminded, I pulled out my phone and Google translated it. Let the feast begin. Huh? As I skimmed through the remaining pages, there were many different entries dating back to 1976. Although all the handwriting was different, the language appeared to be the same, but I couldn't recognize it, and neither could Google Translate. The most recent entries into the book were unmistakably written by Eve. What the fuck is going on? I muttered. I took several pictures of various entries, including Eve's. Then I shut the book and put it back where I found it. The rest of the day dragged on eternally. That night, when Eve got home, I acted perfectly normal. But around 10 p.m., she got a text from Katie. "Oh my God," she gasped. "What is it?" I asked. "Josh and Katie had another fight. She said he hit her, then bolted off." "Jesus, what?" I asked, sitting up eagerly. "I don't know, but she wants me to go and be with her." "I'm sorry, babe, I have to go." No, it's fine. Go be with her," I replied. I knew it was all a lie. The texts were real, but I knew Katie was in on this whole freak show, whatever it was. Eve kissed me goodbye and hurried outside to the car, speeding off into the night. I shot up off the sofa and got dressed. If she was heading to the woods in the car to avoid my seeing her, she'd have to drive all the way around to the other side of it, park somewhere on a country lane and follow the trail, which would take her about 30 minutes. That gave me plenty of time to get there first and hide out, phone camera at the ready. June 21st is the summer solstice, and we live in England, so it was still fairly light outside as I marched down to the woods. The sky was a dazzling orange. When I approached the clearing, the discarded bonfire still there, I stopped about 20 feet away. I found a brilliant tree, tall and gnarly with thick branches. It was the perfect tree to climb up. I was able to climb pretty high, and I nestled myself fairly comfortably on a thick branch. I tore away some of the foliage below me so I could see the clearing. I waited and waited, and the night grew dark. I kept checking my phone. It became 11:30 p.m. The big, bright, full moon of the summer solstice was glistening down, and it illuminated the clearing, making it look ghostly. It was almost midnight, and I had been waiting about an hour and a half. I was ready to leave when I heard voices chattering from a distance. There were quite a few people approaching the clearing, it sounded like. I peered down and saw a group of people, including Eve and Katie and some other older men and women. They were all wearing some kind of weird protective gray clothing, as though they were dealing with chemicals. Altogether, there were 11 of them. Oddly, I noticed Eve, Katie, and one other woman were carrying sacks that looked pretty heavy and were clanking loudly, while a few others were carrying shovels. One of the men prepared another fire whilst the others chatted amongst themselves. I was confused, but in mere moments my confusion turned to horror. 2 men approached the rest of the group, and between them they were dragging a man by his legs who had been gagged and bound. His head was bloodied, and I could hear him whimpering. The men threw their victim onto a tree stump and removed his gag. I squinted my eyes and realized who it was. They had taken Josh. "Please don't kill me," he begged. "Katie, please, whatever you're doing, please stop." Tears were streaming down his face, glistening in the light of the fire and moon. "Silence, little lamb," Katie said. I couldn't keep my eyes off Eve. She was watching, as were the others, with a sinister smirk on her face. She, Katie, and the other woman put their sacks on the ground. All 13 of them gathered round the fire in a circle. Josh was wriggling, trying to get out of the ropes, but it was no use. In unison, everyone chanted the same thing: "Festum incipiat." I looked on in bewilderment. Katie reached into one of the sacks and pulled out a huge curved blade. She walked calmly over to Josh, who began screaming. His scream was cut short as she swung the blade into his neck. He made a stomach-turning gurgle, collapsing from his knelt position onto the ground. Katie put her foot on his chest and yanked the knife out. Dark blood squirted out in pulses. She hacked again and again until his head came off. The others cheered, and Katie grabbed his severed head by the hair and threw it into the fire. "It's all right, little lamb," she said. She then chanted something in a language I couldn't understand. "Nima," chanted the others. I almost vomited. In my shock and disbelief, I had forgotten about my phone. My phone! I needed to call the police. I rummaged through my pocket and pulled it out, but I was trembling too much. I dropped it, and it clattered loudly between branches before hitting the ground with a thud. They all turned. "What was that?" one of the men said. "I don't know," said a woman. "Probably a squirrel. Go and look." "Eve, you said this was the perfect spot." The first man spat. "It is," Eve assured. "No one comes here, especially not at this time." The man made his way over and searched the ground beneath my tree. He looked up, but he must not have seen me or found my phone, because he returned to the campfire empty-handed. "Eve," began Katie. My ears perked up. "Why don't you do the honors whilst Jacob sets up the spit?" Eve smiled, and she reached into one of the sacks, pulling out a different knife, a huge machete-like blade. One of the men, Jacob, grinned and took a bunch of metal parts out. "No," I thought. "Please no, please no." Eve approached Josh's body, and I looked away, covering my ears. I started crying. It poured out of me, and I fought back sobs, only allowing silent convulsions. When I looked back, they were all stood, and an elderly woman who had previously remained hooded stepped forward. "Well done," she said. Our sacrifice will be rewarded. Our bodies have been nourished. Everyone stood around the fire, holding hands, and chanted a prayer in the language I didn't know. I looked away again as they just laughed and talked like they were friends round a campfire, their mouths full. My stomach eventually turned, and I vomited into my inner jacket pocket so as to make as little noise as possible. I didn't know what time it was, but eventually they had finished. One man extinguished the fire with a fire extinguisher he had pulled out of one of the sacks, whilst Eve, Katie, and the others started digging with the shovels. After a while, they had dug an extremely deep hole. Katie fished Josh's charred head out of the fire and threw it in. A few others used the shovels to scrape what was left in the fireplace into the hole as well. And then what little remained of Josh went in. I shut my eyes again. When I finally dared to open them, it was light. Birds twittered around me. Everyone had gone. The clearing looked normal, save for the big patch of fresh dirt. Soon enough, that would blend in with the rest of the undergrowth. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. The air around me was electric with fear. I threw off my jacket, descending the tree carefully. I looked around for my phone to call the police, but I couldn't find it. I kept searching frantically, but it was nowhere. Shit. That man must have found it. I scrambled over into the clearing, and a crow squawked at me, perched atop a branch. It was then that I saw the little note pinned to the same tree, written in Eve's handwriting. We saw you. Oh. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. I care for an old woman with dementia who thinks her dead husband is still alive. I'm starting to believe her. It was my stepfather who wanted me to get a job. Even part-time, he said, was better than rotting away in my room. I would have been perfectly happy spending my last summer before I turned 18 doing just that, but unfortunately it wasn't an option. On this particular day, I stood by the cramped entrance to our small town's one supermarket, gazing up at the employees' wanted posters stapled to the bulletin board. Glancing over at the dead-eyed workers slouched behind the tills across from me, I decided against retail. Scanning the notices, I eventually found an offer that piqued my interest. Friends of the Elderly, a small local charity set up by our town's nursing home. Volunteers would be assigned to a pensioner with few, if any, living friends or relatives. They'd be sent to them one day out of the week and spend an hour or two keeping them company. The work was unpaid, sure, but it was also hardly work. Most importantly, it'd leave me functionally free for the entire summer. It wasn't what my stepfather had in mind, but I'd like to see him try and talk me out of something like this in front of my mother. I tore a slip of paper with a phone number printed on it from the poster and cycled home. Following a brief phone call, I visited the nursing home and talked with the kind man there who was organizing the whole system. After that initial in-person rendezvous, the rest of the correspondence was done via email. In early June, my position was finalized, and I was paired with a lovely old lady called Agatha. Agatha lived alone in a musty house near the edge of town, not too far from one of my friends. My stepdad was apprehensively proud of me for finding fulfilling work like this and paid for my first bus fare out to her. Fishing back in my mind for what the man at the care home told me, I managed to remember exactly where she lived and hopped off the bus right outside of the driveway. two weathered marble horsehead statues mounted the stone pillars that led into the wall that encircled her property. Much of her land was covered in trees, and the divided wall was the only clue to where her estate ended and the surrounding forest began. I pushed open the old iron gate, which grinded like stiff cogs. Squeezing between the narrow gap, I began to stroll up the poorly paved path that led to Agatha's house. Her lawn was a jungle of weeds and discarded furniture. The walk to her pastel blue door felt endless, but finally I knocked. Taking into account her poor hearing, I rang the bell too. I heard a muffled voice from inside, assumedly saying, "I'm coming." And before long, the door swung open. A decrepitly old woman greeted me, and I responded back with a simple, "Hi, I'm Norman." She took my hand in hers and led me inside. Agatha's home smelled like dust and sherry. Her decor triggered long, dormant memories of visiting my own late grandparents. As soon as the door closed, she was offering everything from sweet milk to shortbread, and guided me to her equally ancient sofa in the front room. Agatha's eyes held pure kindness, devoid of any malice. She looked at me like a beloved son. Midway through our first talk, it struck me that she might truly believe I was. The thought nearly brought tears, but I kept smiling. She spent half an hour asking about school and if I had a girlfriend. I chatted easily, knowing keeping her company was my job. When I finally asked about her, she seemed surprised but answered anyway. "Oh, it's been hard since my Strauss died," she said, putting a bony hand on my shoulder. "I feel so lonely sometimes. I suppose I have the lady from the hospital. She visits a few times a week, but she's nothing but a sourpuss." With that, Agatha threw back her head and cackled dryly. "She only ever talks about what I should and shouldn't do. Take these pills, don't go outside. Pardon my language, dear, but she treats me like a damn child." With that, Agatha looks down and sighs. Then her paper-thin lips turn up into a smile and she looks at me again. "I have you now, though, so none of that matters," she says and shakes my shoulder. I beam at her, feeling a warmth grow inside my heart. I suddenly realized how rewarding this job could be, even if it wasn't monetarily. And despite the bulging varicose vein on her forehead that looked like it could pop at any moment, and despite the fact that she spoke with the cadence similar to the hum of an old radiator, I could imagine myself spending a large part of my summer with her. Before I could reassure Agatha that I could come keep her company whenever she wanted, she stood with a crack and shuffled to the kitchen, hollering back that she was just going to make some tea. I smiled and sat patiently where I was, looking around the room inquisitively. It was like a mini museum with every surface covered in more dusty knickknacks than I could count. There were porcelain figurines, old photographs, crystal bijoux, jars of marbles, an urn, stuffed animals, taxidermied animals, everything. Most intriguingly, an odd white hood in a glass box. I stood up and took one of the pictures from the mantel. A long-dead soldier looked out from the frame. I wondered if this was Strauss, her late husband, who she mentioned in passing. I heard the friction between her slippers and the gray-blue carpet as Agatha steplessly walked back into the living room. She sat with her mug of English tea and a handful of cookies. I returned to the space next to her and showed her the portrait. "Who's this?" I asked her, both genuinely curious and trying to make conversation. She slid on her eyeglasses, which had until then been dangling around her neck. The lenses looked as thick as a submarine's porthole, She sucked her teeth and then suddenly sat back and let out a long ah as she recognized him. "That's Zoran," she exclaimed. "He's my Strauss older brother. That would have been him in the Second World War." I paused, a strange thought suddenly forming in my mind. Was he I began but trailed off. Agatha realized the implications of my unspoken words and frowned. "Oh, heavens, no. Oh, no, Zoran was part of the... She trailed off, losing her train of thought. After a few seconds in silence, she spoke again and didn't stop for some time. "My Strauss came to America when he was a boy, just after the start of that horrible war. Only he and his mother made it, and she died of the consumption not long afterwards. My family took him in and taught him English. He worked and lived on our farm for the rest of his childhood and some into his adulthood. Well, I was wet behind the ears back then, I don't mind admitting it, but I still knew what love was. I loved Strauss, but my father wouldn't have it. To him, he was just like any other farm animal, I suppose. Even if he didn't think that exactly, he still made him sleep out in the barn like he was. I got comfortable in my seat and waited silently for what I expected to be something of a life story. We eloped in 1949. Stealing is a sin, and you should do right to remember that. But we had to take money from my father. We had no choice. We took that money and used it to make something of a new life for ourselves once we got up north. We came across this town that you live in today. Back then it had doubled in size in just 4 years. They wouldn't notice us two slipping in." She suddenly drew in a deep, rasping breath. "The reason for the growth was the new factory. It was built by the government in 1945 to manufacture all the new lotions and potions they came up with during the war. Well, it had endless jobs going for it, and my Strauss took one of them. We settled down then and tried to start a family. It was all going dandy until 1954. I expected Agatha to continue after her long pause, but she didn't. She just wordlessly stared at the white cloth mask in the glass cabinet. I leaned in and put what I hoped was a soothing hand over hers. "What happened in 1954? I asked. "There was a fire at the factory." She said the words like they were the closing line of a somber poem. Before long, she spoke again. "Most of the young men and boys died, so I should count myself lucky that my Strauss survived. And I do, of course, but I was never sure if he did. You see, he wasn't the same after it. His spirit never changed. Oh no, but he was so badly burnt, it was a chemical fire that did it. The bigwigs tried to blame the workers themselves for it, you know that." "I'm so sorry," I said, using my stock reply for any tragic news. "I'm surprised you don't know. What are they teaching in these schools nowadays anyway? Nobody gives a hoot about local history." She mumbled out a few more of her qualms with the U.S. education system before I subtly reminded her that she'd been telling me about her late husband. Of course," muttered Agatha, desperately trying to collect her memories. After some time of staring off into space, she proclaimed, "Ah!" and stood. She shuffled the shelf on which stood her late husband's urn. Next to it was a glass cabinet. There was a girl at school that I had a crush on, a major one. She was a film buff to the point where it became her personality and would usually ask people what their favorite film was before she got their name. I recently found out that her favorite movie was David Lynch's The Elephant Man. As soon as I did, I found a way to watch it and brought it up with her the next time I saw her. Her name was Layla, and our first date was the following Monday. I bring this up just to say that when I looked in the glass cabinet, the mask I saw reminded me of the one worn by Joseph Merrick. It was made of plain white cloth, yellowed slightly with age, and had 2 eye holes cut in the shape of a squashed circle. After he got better, he found work as a groundskeeper at the high school. He took to wearing this mask so the kids didn't point and laugh at him. Kids can be so cruel sometimes, she recounted as she gazed at her Strauss's ashes. "Say, what high school do you go to?" she said as she turned to face me again. I told her, and she smiled as she realized that it was the same school Strauss worked at for nearly 30 years. We sat again, and she told me of how he died at only 61. It was an aggressive form of lymphoma. The sadness in Agatha's eyes as she told me was heartbreaking. It was like she'd only heard the news of her husband's passing moments before. I put a comforting hand on her shoulder as she slipped into melancholy. As I did, I gleaned the time from my watch and realized I'd been here half an hour longer than I was supposed to be. I liked that first day with her, don't get me wrong, but when I realized the time, I got up to leave. "So soon?" Agatha asked. "I'll be back same time next week. I'll see you then," I replied, trying not to feel like a heartless monster. She escorted me to the door and took my hand in both of hers. She shook it within an inch of its life and thanked me profusely for keeping her company. Just as I turned to leave, she grabbed my wrist again. "Yugoslavia," she said seemingly at random. "Zoran, during the war, he was a partisan." I realized she was talking about her brother-in-law. I asked about earlier and smiled my response. I waved at her, walking down her winding driveway, a gallery of garbage among the weeds either side of me. I got the bus back just in time for dinner. "How'd it go with the crone?" my dad asked as he chewed on the fried leg of some dead bird. "It went well, and don't call her that. She was lovely, actually," I responded. "You're still here, so I see she didn't bore you to death," he said, sucking meat, juice from his fingers. She didn't know. She was telling me about her husband Strauss for most of it. "Strauss?" my father repeated as he looked at me for the first time in the conversation. "As in Scarface Strauss?" "Maybe," I replied. "Where do you know him from?" "He was the groundskeeper at your high school all the way back when I went there. He used to terrify the kids. God, whenever he caught someone playing around in his freshly racked pile of leaves, he'd pull his mask up and glare at them. It'd always send them running back to class." The revelation that my own father was one of the cruel children Agatha mentioned didn't come as a shock. Not wanting my faith in his morals to degrade further, I didn't ask him any more questions about Strauss. Maybe another time, I thought to myself. My date with Layla went perfectly, if you were wondering. We met at the empty field near town. Just us, some smokes, and the remnants of where a county fair had been set up. She blew smoke rings in my face while I tried not to cough, and we talked like we'd known each other forever. Even when she opened up about her parents' deaths and her uncle's addiction, I didn't mind. I just listened, saying I'm so sorry when words failed. When she kissed my cheek goodbye, leaving a purple lipstick stain, I knew I was hers. I watched her walk off to the bus stop with the eyes of a lovesick puppy. Come Saturday, it was my turn to catch a bus. There was one in our town, one that was far from reliable. Still, before I could afford a car of my own, it was all I could peg my hopes on. I'm not the most athletic guy, especially not back then, and cycling to Agatha's seemed like an impossible task. Or at least a task that'd leave me with a stitch. The old rickety beast wasn't too late that day, and I arrived at Agatha's front gate practically on time. I pushed it open and started the trek up the path to her house. Her large garden was a mess, and I wondered if she'd pay me on the side to clear it up for her. As I neared the house, I was stopped in my tracks by a low growling behind me. I turned and saw an Alsatian baring its teeth at me. Thick, steaming saliva dripped from its black gums to the paved ground beneath. I wasn't afraid of dogs, but this one made me take a wary step back. Behind me, I heard the front door open. As it did, the dog suddenly took off into the overgrown lawn and off into the forest. I turned to see Agatha waiting on the doorstep, smiling absently at me. I made my way up to me and gently shook her outstretched hand. "Hey, Agatha," I said. She gripped my hand in both of hers. Her wrinkled skin felt like dry leaves. "Hello, dear, you must be Edward's son. Come in, come in." She mumbled and led me inside. Before I could correct her, she continued. "When was the last time you visited, huh? Christmas '87? The house has changed so much since then. Let me give you a tour." "Agatha," I began. "I'm Norman. I'm here to keep you company, remember? I was here last week." She paused at the foot of her stairs. She stared intensely at nothing in particular and began to murmur no to herself over and over again in a voice so quiet I almost couldn't hear her. Slowly, she looked back at me. With vice-like eye contact, she faintly said, "I'll give you the tour," then started ascending the carpeted staircase. With no reason not to, I followed her. The musty stench that wafted through the first floor was like a thick, inescapable stench on the second. Every wall was lined with dozens of picture frames, each with a faded photo of a long dead relative. The constant glaze of dust was like the shedded skin of a python. Someone needed to hire her a cleaner. "My Strauss loved his antiques," she said as we brushed past oak shelves stacked with archaic trinkets. "This is the guest bedroom where you'll be staying," suggested Agatha, and waves a frail hand towards a dull wooden door to our left. I opened my mouth to correct her, but bit my tongue. "And this was my Strauss's bedroom." She motioned now to the door directly to the right of the guest room. Oh, Lord, was he a snorer. I used to kick him out of bed so often because of it that he ended up just sleeping in there in the end. I chuckled politely while she conducted the rest of her tour, ending in her bedroom. It was the last room of the upstairs hallway, which ended in another vase with more dead vegetation. Above the pot was a circular window, which gave a porthole's view of the forest beyond the house. I looked up and saw the pull-down hatch to the attic. Agatha noticed me looking and spoke. "That goes up to the attic. There's nothing but asbestos up there, so don't you think about going up. Now let me put on some tea." With that, she began to shuffle over the sickly green carpet, across the snubbed corridor and down the stairs. Looking back at some of the more interesting antiques, I followed her. I wasn't even halfway down the staircase when I heard it. I stopped. I listened closely. I could have sworn I heard a quiet bang. I listened out for it for some time until finally Agatha called my name, my real name, and I hurried down into the lounge. I spent hours listening to Agatha's stories about our town's history. Though her memory faltered on important things, she knew every scandal, secret, and rumor about local families. Affairs, hidden children, even a devil's pact. Time flew and I nearly missed my bus. After thanking her, I rushed upstairs to her lime green themed bathroom. On my way down, I noticed the attic hatch wide open, swinging at a 90-degree angle. Assuming a faulty latch, I left without mentioning it. If I had, maybe she wouldn't have died the way she did. When I came into Agatha's house that third week, something felt different. Office. It wasn't just because I'd cycled there and my legs were burning. The atmosphere in the house was different. I called out her name and her carer came down the stairs. She greeted me with a deflated smile and told me that Agatha had taken a turn for the worse. She was in bed in her room and I went up to her while her carer attempted to fix her lunch in the cramped kitchen. I made my way down the garishly carpeted floor into her room, where the door had been left open a crack. I pushed in and saw Agatha lying weakly on a bed. I sat on the edge of her bed, patted Agatha's arm, and asked her how she was feeling. Dozens of bottles of pills were stacked on her bedside cabinet, some spilling their contents. Surrounding them were a few half-full glasses of water and orange juice. Slowly, the old woman opened her eyes and looked at me. They were glassy and stared without any recognition. Still, she broke into a smile. "I feel wonderful, dear, just wonderful," she replied in a raspy voice and grabbed my hand firmly. My Strauss came back last night. I nearly grimaced at her delusion, but hid my reaction for her sake. "That's nice," I said. "It was so wonderful," Agatha continued. "He hasn't changed a bit. I stayed up all night talking to him, just like the old days." She shook my hand, which was clasped between hers vigorously. She looked so happy. "He's in his bedroom down the hall. You should pop in and introduce yourself," Agatha said suddenly after a minute of uneasy silence. Before I could respond, her carer, who I never got the name of, walked into the room. She was carrying a streaming mug of something hot and sat on the other side of the bed. "Here you go, love," Agatha's carer said, setting the cup of tea down. She spoke with a British accent, which explained her affinity for tea making. "Thank you, dear," the old woman rasped and took the mug, taking tentative sips. "You should get some more rest," suggested the carer as she leaned across the bed and took a bottle of pills from my side. "Take 2 of these and try to go to sleep. Sleep is the best healer." Agatha nodded and began to fumble a capsule or 2 out of the small amber-colored bottle. Her carer stood and motioned for me to follow her. I did, and as soon as we were in the hall, she spoke. "I think what you're doing is great," she said, "but they don't know. But Agatha's an ill woman. You should go home. Leave her be for a while." I nodded, understanding her reasoning. It would be hard to keep Agatha company while she's passed out on what looked like it'd soon be her deathbed. The British carer patted my shoulder and walked past me and down the stairs. Soon after, I turned to follow her. As I walked down the short hall, I glanced furtively at Strauss's old room. I noticed the door was open, just a crack. That week was the best of the summer. Layla was once again unemployed, and we spent the entire week together. Just before we parted on Friday evening, she asked me if I was free again on Saturday. "I'll be at Agatha's, I think. For most of the day at least, I'm sorry," I said, forlorn. "What about in the evening or morning?" Layla replied. I paused and thought her question over. Eventually I said, "Want to come with me?" And she did. That Saturday we walked up the path leading to Agatha's house together. When she answered the door, I noticed she looked pale. That unhealthy complexion glossed over when she saw Layla, however. In a strange way, it was comforting to see Agatha genuinely not recognize someone she didn't know. We came in and talked for a bit before I decided today was a good opportunity to work on the lawn. Agatha agreed and Layla kept her company while I headed out. Before I did, the old woman shuffled into her kitchen, rummaged around for a while before coming back with a rusty iron key. For the shed, she told me, and entrusted it into my palm, curling my fingers around it for me. I made my way through the long grass to the back of the house. There was a smattering of gravel back there, an unused rusting husk of a car. Moss grew over the hood and mildew covered the seats. The shed looked equally as dilapidated, and the bolt on the lock seemed like it would disintegrate at the slightest contact. When I slid the key in, thankfully it came open with a slow grind. I let it drop to the ground and slowly opened the rotten wooden door. I was met with the stench of death. I instantly recoiled, burying my nose in my elbow. It was a raccoon carcass that reminded me of a ketchup packet that had been stamped on. I grabbed a cobweb-covered shovel, scooped up the remains, and dumped them past an old picket fence. After a quick sign of the cross, I hauled a heavy manual lawnmower to the front yard. Clearing the scattered junk, mostly bits of washing machines, car parts, and dishwashers, felt like disturbing an archaeological site. I stacked what I could on the paved path, wondering how long it had all been rusting there. The lawnmower was a predictable nightmare. I had to stop every half a minute to untangle the blade or dump shredded grass from the painfully small basket. My only saving grace was that I arrived closer to the evening, since I reckoned the midday sun would have finished me off. After an hour, I'd only cut away a small clearing of overgrowth. To make matters worse, the dog, that mangy Alsatian I bumped into a few weeks before, was back. It sat near the tree line, judging me. I know it doesn't make sense to feel like your technique is being critiqued by a mutt, but that's what I felt in that moment. Eventually, some respite came when Layla came out to me holding a glass of orange juice. "You missed a patch," she said teasingly. I pretended and failed to be annoyed as I took the glass of juice from her and attempted to down it in one. I failed at that too, and OJ came out my nose as I coughed and spluttered. Layla burst into laughter. Once we both steadied ourselves, I asked her how she was finding Agatha. "Good, good," she replied. "She's kinda intense, and she loves to talk. Her favorite movie is Mary Poppins, which I can respect." I smiled, glad they were bonding. I never had a grandmother. One died before I was born, the other when I was an infant. I felt Agatha starting to fill that role for me in a sense. I made an unspoken obligation to continue my visits to her after the summer ended. Layla disappeared back inside, and I continued my moil for another hour or so. When I finished, I put the useless mower back in the shed before heading into the house, where I was greeted with a cool iced tea. I spoke with Agatha for a bit, explaining to her the world I did and what I'll do the next time I come, until Layla said it was time to go. We both got up and began our walk to the nearest bus stop, waving at the old lady as we walked down the path, which I may add was no longer infiltrated with weeds, most of it anyway. So what do you think of her? I asked again as we approached the bus stop, fishing for a more honest answer. She's sweet, Leia replied. Reminds me of my own grandma a lot. Yeah, I get that, I muttered. Strauss seems interesting, Layla said as we took our seats in the cramped glass enclosure next to the stop sign. Did she give you the life story? I asked with a chuckle. She did, admitted Layla. There were a few gaps in it, though. Yeah, I exhaled. She's old, I guess. It's Alzheimer's. Oh, right. I thought it was something like that. Yeah, poor woman, I said. It's such a terrifying illness. It is, Layla said glumly. There was a pause. The street lamps began to flicker on as the sun went to sleep. Then she spoke again. He didn't have much to say. I looked at Layla, curious. Who didn't? I asked her. Strauss, she replied, Agatha's husband. I let out a chuckle which comes to an abrupt end halfway through. What do you mean he didn't have much to say? I probed Layla further. I mean, she began, slightly annoyed, that he didn't have much to say when I saw him. Or, well, anything. There was a moment or two of silence. You saw him? I asked. Layla sighed. Yeah, well, I mean, not really. He came down the stairs while I was talking to Agatha. She went over to talk to him, but I didn't hear anything. I could just see his, legs. I froze as a sudden, painful realization crept over me. Agatha had told me her husband came home, and now this. In that moment, I knew what was happening. A relative of Agatha's had come to stay, and in her unending confusion, she convinced herself that it was her husband. This theory terrified me, as I'd always assumed that the last ounce of clarity the old woman would keep would be over her husband, her lover, the man she was married to for almost 50 years. I felt sick, imagining the cherished memories she made with Strauss over her lifetime crumbling to dust in her mind. Did you see her carer today? I asked Layla. Georgia? Layla replied. Oh, is that her name? I said, relieved I now knew without having to ask Georgia directly. Yeah, and no, I didn't see her, Layla said. Agatha told me she hadn't been around in days, like a week almost. What the hell? I barked. I sat back in the uncomfortable bench inside of the bus shelter, complete with the latest in anti-homeless technology. The sloped metal bar digging into my haunches worsened my mood. They can't just leave her on her own like that, I continued. She needs constant care. Just a week ago, she was bedridden. Layla watched me as I grew furious and stood up. I'm gonna go back to her house. See how she is and who's with her. Make sure she's okay, I proclaimed. Layla rose from her sectioned-off part of the bench and stood by me. I'll come with you, she said. It's fine, Layla, you can get the bus home. The next one is the last one anyway, I replied back. I'm coming, okay? Besides, it's not like I have a curfew, she rebutted, and that was that. We both began the walk back to Agatha's house. In the late evening of the summer months, the world turns blue. It was this blue world that Layla and I crept through to return to the old lady's house. The walk back went quicker than we thought, and we were soon met with the familiar iron gate. I pushed it open with a long, drawn-out creak and began the trek up the walkway to the old and venerable abode. I felt an uneasy cloud waft around us as we drew closer to her home. It reached a boiling point as we both sensed something bounding towards us from amongst the remaining tall grass. It was the German Shepherd. Moments before Layla and I both suffered from a shared heart attack, The dog revealed itself and trotted between us, begging for scratches and belly rubs. I let out a tentative exhale and patted the mutt just behind the ears as it unfurled its tongue. Layla mentioned something about the mortality rate of rabies, and I quickly recoiled my hand. The dog followed us the rest of the way to Agatha's front door, staying a short distance behind us. I knocked on the door and, as I assumed, received no answer. It was getting dark now, and Agatha wouldn't have been up this late on the best of days. I picked up a chipped gnome by the front step and fished out the front door key from under it. It slid into the lock and I let myself inside. It was weird entering her home at night. The place had a perfect stillness about it, like it had been left uninhabited for decades. Layla followed behind me, and the old dog stayed put on the front step, not putting a paw further. Layla was about to ascend the staircase when I veered off through the doorway on the right and made my way into the living room. The glass case which once held the heirloom of Strauss's hood mask was now empty. "What's wrong?" Layla said as she crept up behind me, making me jump out of my skin. "The cabinet. It's empty," I replied. "Is it not supposed to be?" Layla said, puzzled. "I'm pretty sure it was earlier." Confused, Layla and I left the front room and climbed the stairs to the second floor. I led her down the corridor to Agatha's room, where I knocked gently on the door. After some time, there was no reply. It felt wrong, but I knew I would have to check inside. I gently opened the door and entered. My plan was to slowly shake the old woman awake, but that was foiled when Layla switched on the light while I was barely halfway across the room. Agatha awoke, startled. I glared back at my girlfriend, who mouthed, "I'm sorry." What's going on?" Agatha stammered as she sat up in bed. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights. Agatha, it's me, Norman. It's fine. I just wanted to see if you're okay," I assured her. Gradually, she calmed as she recognized me. "Oh, Norman." She paused and looked past me at the doorframe. "And who are you, my dear?" "My name is Layla," Layla confirmed as stood next to me. "Such a lovely name," Agatha said absently. "Why the late visit?" We just wanted to see if you were okay since your carer has abandoned you," I told the old woman earnestly. "I don't need Georgia anymore. My Strauss is back," she rasped. Layla and I exchanged a glance. "Which room is he in?" I asked, though I already suspected. "First on the right," she said. I left the musty room and walked down the short, equally musty hallway to Strauss's supposed bedroom. I knocked on the door and received no reply. I took the door handle in my palm and slowly opened it. As it cracked open, a torrent of flies escaped from within. Startled, I pushed the door open fully. Sat on the bed with his back to me as a figure. He wore a dark coat as far as I could make out and had a bone-white scalp. I quickly realized he was Strauss's hood mask. Suddenly, the funk from within the room hit me, and my sense of smell revolted against my body. I bent double at the grotesque stench that I can only describe as hot feces and roadkill. I took a step back into the hallway, but not before I noticed the stacks of pots and cups filled with a thick, red corporeal liquid. As the figure stood, I ran to Agatha's room. "We need to leave," I commanded, taking hold of Layla's forearm. "Agatha, come with me." Agatha swung her frail legs out of bed but didn't move much more. "Whatever for?" she asked and smiled. "Allow me to justify myself for a second. I loved Agatha like she was my own grandmother, but she'd be living with whoever that was for days, maybe even weeks at that point, and no harm had come to her. This logic was sound in the moment, and I acted on it. I guided Layla out of the room and into the corridor, leaving Agatha where she was. The figure stood in the middle of the hall, dark and imposing. The hood mask, unworn for decades, was now pulled tight over his head. The two eye holes had only blackness behind them. His long black coat fell down to his feet, which were hovering a few inches off the ground. At once he lunged like an animalistic predator. His pale, bony hands forged a path to Layla's neck, and he slammed her against the wall. I was looking in her eyes as the light went out in them. Manic, I ran into Agatha's room and slammed the door shut behind me. It was quickly thrown open again by the figure who calmly floated inside. I collapsed backwards, steadying myself only when I fell against an old bookshelf. Agatha got to her feet and stood in front of the figure. She put her hands tenderly on either side of its head. "Oh, Strauss, my love," she whispered. She curled her fingers under the rim of the hood mask and carefully, as she'd done hundreds of times before with her husband, raised it from its face. Suddenly, Agatha soured. You're not my Strauss," she said in a moment of perfect clarity. The figure in turn put its hands on either side of Agatha's face. Before she could squirm away, it dived down, sinking two haggard canine teeth into her neck. It lapped up what blood it could feverishly before letting the old woman crumple to the floor, still holding her husband's mask. Then it locked its attention on me. I glanced to my side, realizing my only hope of survival was the large window. I clambered to it and pushed it open as far as it could go as I heard movement behind me. I felt vomit rise in my throat and jumped. My ankle shattered. I felt the bone turn into a jigsaw puzzle as soon as I hit the cement. I gasped through the pain and tried to walk. After every few steps, I'd collapse back down to my hands and knees. I kept the routine going as I made my way to the front of the house. I didn't look back, even when I heard the gentle landing of the figure as it floated down from Agatha's room. I aimed for the grass, trying to give me torn knees and palms respite from the gravel. As soon as I reached the green edge, I collapsed onto my back. The figure was standing in front of me. It was now that I finally got a good look at the thing's face. Its skin was as white as the hood mask, interrupted only by the blackness of its eyes and the redness that caked its gullet and neck. Its sockets were empty, filled only with a dark bile. I could have sworn I saw a torn nerve dangling from the gape. Its nose looked like it had been ravaged by some wasting disease, like leprosy or syphilis, maybe both. The same was true for its non-existent ears and lips. Its teeth looked like scattered bits of broken glass, loosely attached to wilting gums. All but its top canines, which were in mint condition. That thing that had been masquerading as Strauss already had more than its feed of blood for the night. But with the way it approached me, I could tell it wanted more. The German shepherd bared its teeth and snarled. The figure, which had been floating just off the ground, on stump-like feet, rotated to look, if it even could, at the source of the growling. As it did, the large dog pounced. Its weight slamming into the figure knocked both to the ground. I started to crawl to the large patch of long grass I'd left uncut. A rusty mattress spring jutting from the earth snagged my pocket, spilling out lint and an empty packet of apple-flavored gum. Just before I dragged myself into that haven, I looked back. I was just in time to see the mutt clamp its fangs around the bottom jaw off the figure, ripping and tearing it from its head. I tumbled onto the grass, landing painfully on an old, discarded garden hoe. Taking my phone from my pocket, I rang the police and managed to stutter out what was happening. I gave them the address I'd memorized weeks before and hung up. Every word I spoke aloud felt like yelling out my exact location. I tore the old garden tool from the soil and used it as a makeshift crutch as I limped down the path. I was moving painfully slow, with each step feeling like an electric shock zapping through my legs and up my spine. I could hear the distant battle behind me, the yelping of the dog interspersed with the otherworldly calls of that thing. After what felt like days, I reached the street. I staggered down rows of high brick walls and foliage. My only thought was going forward, away from that killer. I still hadn't gone as far as the bus stop when I heard the noise. It was a rapid pitter-pattern, and I turned to see the figure sprinting down the road with the speed of an Olympic athlete and the intent of a starving big cat. Its stump feet left trails of gunk behind it on the road, meat scrapped away by the rough asphalt. I barely had time to react before it leapt on me, but I did. I jabbed the hoe at it, feeling like a lion tamer. The dull metal tip collided with its chest, and I felt the rotted wood snap as it did. It lunged, its top teeth sharp and ready to rip, its bottom teeth still somewhere in Agatha's garden. And then it was flung back. Its reaction to having the stake-like wooden handle plunged into the approximate location of its heart was immediate and extreme. It was downed for all of 5 seconds before it stood again. I wept and clutched the other half of the hoe to my chest, the sharp, splintered edge pointing outward. The figure staggered uneasily towards me, the accidental stake still protruding from its chest. Suddenly, a spurt of black gunk erupted from its mushy skull. I took a step to the side and turned to its new assailant. The crowd of police officers opened fire as it tried to charge towards them. I put my fingers in my ears and collapsed to the ground as they fired round after round, finally putting an end to any twitch or jerk from the decrepit body. A woman in uniform took me from my hiding spot and led me away from the scene. The rest of that night was a blur. In fact, the rest of that year was a blur. The only other bit that I remember from that night was being sat down in the cop car by the lady who'd found me and having the weirdest conversation of my. She told me that in October of the year prior that there'd been an apparent murder-suicide. On Halloween night, 2 boys were brutally killed by their Sunday school teacher, who then took his own life. I knew the story well, as Gary, the supposed killer, had taught me. The cop told me that this was a baseless rumor and that she'd been a first responder that night. What she saw in that house was no mentally ill zealot. It was a monster. It was the figure. It was what had escaped her that night and immediately after went on to pose as the dead husband of an elderly woman for longer than I could have imagined. Story 2 ends here now. We drift into story 3. Little Miracles. Back in 2018, I was in a difficult position. I'd lost my job working security for a local firm and was looking for something on short notice. Add to that, I was in a difficult situation with my then-girlfriend. We were on a sort of pause. It was a strange time. In short, I was looking for a job and I found one. There's this charity, which I won't name, that handles distribution of something called the Little Miracle Chest. These have been around since the 80s, but they're very limited in scope. It's these colorful toy boxes that are sent out to first-time parents, mostly in the southern East Coast states. They usually contain a couple of goodies, some parental advice books, a Bible, and a couple other things. It's been around for a while, but I don't think a lot of people talk about it. I read online that a local chapter handling the Little Miracle Chests needed permanent warehouse security, so I applied. I had one of those chests as a kid, and honestly, I loved it. I thought it was a nice callback, especially at a time when I needed stability. For the sake of brevity, I'll just say this up front. I've changed a couple of names around, including my own, just to make sure my position and the location stays anonymous. I met with a guy, let's call him Jonah, friendliest guy you'll ever meet. Early 50s, honest living kind of guy, if you could look past the creepy horn-rimmed glasses. He looked like a cool dad who'd stepped out of a 70s commercial. Firm handshake, calming voice. I met him just outside the warehouse, and he had the most starched white shirt I'd ever seen. "Jonah," he said, shaking my hand, "and you must be Henry." "You got that right. Glad to be here." "It's like I know you already. Do you want the tour?" "Gotta admit," I said, "I'm a bit nervous about the interview." "Interview?" Jonah laughed. "My friend, as far as I'm concerned, the job is yours. We got your application is all. You fit the bill just fine." "You sure?" I asked. "I figured you'd need some, I don't know, clarity." "I got a good eye for people," smiled Jonah. "But I suppose I have one question that needs answering if you're so inclined." "Go right ahead." Jonah put a hand up to shield his eyes from the July sun. The guy was clearly an outdoorsy type, being tanned from head to toe. "Do you consider yourself a nurturing man?" he asked. It was a perfectly fair question, but it was difficult to answer. I had this girlfriend, Jill, who I'd been seeing for about 8 months. We got along great and had been talking about moving in together when she revealed something. She had a kid. I had no idea. It had been this thing she hadn't intended to hide. It just ended up that way. We got along so well, and by the time she wanted to tell me, it had gotten strange to bring it up. I don't think it was nefarious, but it became this strange sticking point in our story. 8 months, and I'd never once heard she had a 5-year-old boy at home. At that point, I didn't know if things were complicated because I didn't want to be a stepdad, or because she'd lied to me. So when Jonah asked me if I was a nurturing man, that's where my thoughts brought me. I zoned out a little and answered as well as I could. "I'd like to think I am," I said, "but I don't know. Hard to tell." "Well, at least you're honest," smiled Jonah. "That makes up for a lot." With that, he gave me a tour of the warehouse. Row after row of Little Miracle chests, all wrapped in cellophane and ready to be shipped out. The Little Miracle chests are about 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, and has a rounded treasure chest kind of lid. The thing is made of some solid kind of wood and has these metal handles bolted to the side. It's heavy, at least 30 pounds. On the side, you got all kinds of classic Americana printed boys and girls playing in the sun, a white church, green grass, a rainbow, happy couples leaning on one another. But also a few of adventurous motifs. like lions being ridden by young boys or little girls feeding unicorns with blue sunflower seeds. It's probably the most sugar-coated, wholesome thing you'll ever see, if you haven't seen one already. Before we could enter, Jonah gave me a tap on the back. These things come straight from the printer, so we have these industrial fans going in there to keep the prints from peeling until they settle, so it's loud in there. All right. So we got these headphones, noise canceling and all. Whenever you're in the main hall, you need these on at all times or you'll hurt your hearing. We can't be held liable for that, Henry. We don't got that kind of money. Fair enough. He gave me the headphones and showed me around the warehouse. There was a definite chemical in the air. It was a prickly smell like old lime and deep ammonia. It stuck with you immediately. Jonah showed me around the main hall, the loading dock, and the various entryways to keep an eye on. He pointed out a few cameras, all the light sources, and where all the emergency buttons were in case of a fire or serious accident. Once we got out of the warehouse, we put away the headphones and put them in a locker. There was this small adjoining office with 2 desks and an honest-to-God fax machine. Jonah explained a couple of details I needed to keep in mind. We got the place pretty cheap because the ground rests on aquifer, he explained. That's been shifting slightly over the years, causing a sort of incline. We've looked into contractors to help us compensate, but it's a steep bill. Long story short, Henry, you need to check to make sure none of the chests tumble off the shelves. We don't want them to break. Not one. Is that why you wrap them up like that? I asked. For traction, and to keep the fumes in. You know, they're straight from the printer. We don't want you to get a wheezy lung. We want you around for a while. I appreciate that. Anything else I ought to know? Well, look at you, smiled Jonah, giving me a firm pat on the shoulder. Being proactive. I knew I picked the right guy. Well, since you asked, there's one last thing. He sat down on one of the desks, trying to look like a cool substitute teacher. I bet that move worked better on the younger folks. Well, 2 things, he admitted. 1, don't use the freezer. We've had to throw out a bunch of stuff because of it. And 2, do you know our motto? The motto? Yeah, the little miracle motto. Do you know it? You used to have one as a kid, right? And of course I knew it. It was written on the inside of the lid, so you saw it every time you opened it. God loves all his little miracles, I said. That's the motto. Hot diggity dog, Henry. I knew you were the perfect guy. He gave me another firm clap on the shoulder. A couple of signed papers later, and I was officially hired. There were a couple more things to keep track of, like where we stored keys, what to do at certain times, and how many hours of the day I had to stick around. I had an alternating schedule with a 3-week rotation. The pay was decent, but I had to scale back on a couple of things on account of only working 4 days out of the week. The extra pay for working the occasional weekend and night shift more than made up for it. All in all, I was only down about $100 or so from my last job, and this was both more stable and had better hours. Jonah was always around, mostly in the office. I saw him try to get that stupid freezer to work a couple of times, but they gave up and started using it for storage. Mostly charity merch like hats and cheap jackets. The people who worked there struck me as harmless but socially awkward. They would bring in the occasional plate of cookies or wish me a blessed afternoon, but they would keep to themselves and give me a curious side-eye. Night shifts were a whole different thing. The little miracle chests look a bit strange in the dark. You have to consider the one I used to have was beat up and torn at the edges. These things were fresh from the printer. They looked nothing like my old thing. It had been thrown out somewhere around my later high school years. I grew up in a troubled home. I didn't know it was a troubled home back then, but it was. I was an only child, and my parents were constantly complaining about their financials. Whenever the two of them were in the same room for more than an hour, they'd yell. There was always something: the broken lawnmower, the extra shift that ruined our weekend plans, the cheap muffler, that strange noise from the shower drain. There was always something, and someone had something to say about it, and they had to say it loudly. I used to get so tired of it that I'd lay under my bed with a pillow over my head trying to drown the sound out. That is, until I realized that the little miracle chest we had was mostly soundproof. I'd put blankets and pillows in there and make it my happy place. I would spend a lot of weekends there with a flashlight tucked under my chin, reading or playing. And whenever I ran out of batteries, I'd imagine what was written on the page and just whisper it into the dark. Or I could be an astronaut for a while, floating through space. Or maybe I was a spy hidden in the trunk of a villain's car. It sounds sad, but I never knew it was. I loved that darkness. It was my own, and no one could take it from me. I'd whisper my little truths into the void, and I felt like it understood me, like it was a friend. I could imagine it saying, "You're our little miracle, Henry, and we'll always be here for you." And every time I looked up, there was that motto: God loves all his little miracles. The job itself wasn't that demanding. I'd help out with the occasional loading at the dock, and I'd keep the place shut down and safe in the evenings. Most of the time, I was walking around the warehouse listening to a podcast or an audiobook. The headphones Jonah gave me were these amazing $400 industrial things that worked as radio, communication, and media player. And he was perfectly fine with me listening to something while on my own. For all his quirks, Jonah was probably the most chill boss I'd ever had. There were a couple of times I had to step in. A couple of chests had slid a bit too far, and I'd have to wrap them up in more cellophane and put them back. Other times, the smell would get so strong that I had to step out for a while. I'd get chills from the overhead fans, and there was always something sticky to get your shoe stuck on. So it wasn't perfect, but what job is? But my troubles started for real when I started using glasses. I'd been riddled with headaches for a while, and Jonah gave me a day off to check with an optician. Turns out I needed glasses. It was a pain to get used to, but even more of a pain to wear them underneath the headphones. I'd get this chafing around the edges of my ears from the constant pressure. After a while, I decided to take a break from the headphones, if only for a while, just to get my ears some time to rest. That's when I noticed something peculiar. The industrial fans weren't really that loud, barely even a hum. I asked Jonah about it, but he insisted I wear the headphones, or at least earplugs. "It's an insurance thing," he argued. "It's really important. Please take this seriously, Henry." I didn't want to lie to him, but I did. Whenever no one was around, I'd put away the headphones. I'd still keep them around my neck if I needed to put them back on, but I'd keep them off most of the time. But that put another thought in my head. What about the floor tilt? Was that really a thing? The fans weren't so bad, so maybe this wasn't either. There was this water-level tool in the office. I borrowed it from Jonah's desk and went into the warehouse. I checked the warehouse shelves one by one. None of them were tilted or at an angle. They were all perfectly straight. I had the day shift the following afternoon. There was a short moment before my lunch break where there was just me and Jonah in the office. He'd kicked his feet up on a chair and basked in the heat like a lizard. I'd only been with Little Miracles for a few weeks, but I'd already grown to enjoy the job. Asking questions about it felt shaky. Jonah looked up at me with a curious expression. "I got a couple of questions about the warehouse," I said. "A couple of things ain't adding up and I need some clarity." "Well, Henry, that's what the good book is for," he smiled. "But I guess I could clear up some of the smaller stuff." "Let's start with the headphones," I continued. "The fans are barely audible. There's no way they could cause any kind of hearing damage." Jonah nodded with a slightly furrowed brow. "All right," he said, "go on. And the shelves. You said the floor was crooked and that the chests kept sliding. I checked the floor and it ain't crooked. Shelves ain't either. So what are you asking me, Henry? What's this adding up to? There's something you're not telling me. If we're gonna be a team, I need to know what's going on." Jonah got up from his chair and patted me on the shoulder. His frown softened into a trained, quiet smile. He held his hand out, urging me to follow him into the warehouse. We wandered over to the closest chest and Jonah gently placed it on the floor. He unwrapped the cellophane, talking to me as it came undone. The smell of the print unfurled like a carpet, spilling over my senses. The ammonia could have choked me, but it was the old lime smell that stuck around the longest. "I can't tell you why they slide off the shelves," Jonah said. "It's just something we have to compensate for." He tapped the chest and opened it, showing me the simple wooden interior. It was empty, with the motto printed on the inside of the lid. "The headphones are a courtesy," Jonah sighed. "A couple of folks feel bad about asking if they can play music or listen to something while they're out here by their lonesome. We figure giving a free pass makes the time go a little faster, and well, we already bought the things." "Jonah, that can't be it. That can't be all there is." He closed the lid and wrapped the chest back up. "Here's God's honest truth," he said. "This entire organization is here to care for the good Lord's little miracles. And if we do what's expected of us, that's what we'll do." There wasn't a hint of a lie. I don't know what I expected. The chests were empty, and while the explanations were weak, they were at least plausible. It was enough to keep my mouth shut for a little longer. "If there's anything else, you know where to find me," he said. "Stick to the script and you'll do fine." And for some time, I did just that. I patrolled those halls day and night, making sure the chests didn't slide off the shelves. I listened to my audiobooks, helped load the trucks, wrapped the chests in cellophane, and that was all there was to it. I had the thought that maybe Jonah had picked a specific chest to open, so at times I'd open others just to check, but they were always empty. For a full month, I didn't think much of it, that is, until one particular night. I didn't use my headphones that evening. My glasses were chafing again. I'd gotten a text from Jill earlier that night, and I kept pacing back and forth trying to figure out what to respond. Hell, maybe I shouldn't respond at all. The message was part apology, part explanation, and a reminder that despite it all, she missed me. Part of me wanted to say I missed her back. Another part wanted to walk away. Jonah's question still stuck with me. Am I a nurturing man? As I paced, I noticed one of the chests having slid a little further than usual. A full corner of the chest was hanging off the edge of the shelf. I put my phone away, slid the chest back in place, and stepped back. As I did, I heard something. It was low, like a mumble from behind a pane of glass. "Thank you." I looked back at the chest. I stared at it, dumbfounded. "You're welcome?" There was no response. And of course there wasn't. How could there be? It might have been the wind, but a part of me knew it wasn't. That noise brought me back to those childhood summers, hidden away in the safety of my little miracle chest while my parents threw dinner plates and novelty mugs. In the safety of that chest, when I whispered something, I'd imagine someone listening, and that someone would sometimes whisper back. And what I heard in that warehouse was exactly like I'd imagined that voice to sound like. From that point on, I started looking at the little miracle chests a bit different. I began questioning whether they were affecting me or I was affected myself. It'd been such a small sound, barely audible. A whisper of a thank you. I could have misheard. I must have. The only other option was nonsensical. Chests can't talk, and I knew for a fact these were empty. But I couldn't help it. During those long hours of the night, I had to look a little closer, listen a little longer, and when I couldn't convince myself to stop, I tried to test them, challenge them even. I'd whisper at them, knock on the lid, or pick up and shake them a bit. Of course, nothing happened, but every now and then I'd see one of them twitch or rattle. Was it one particular chest that moved, or was it all of them? One night I didn't even bother to try. I just picked a chest and stared at it, waiting for it to move. I'd looked at it for so long that the image sort of blurred, like when you hear a word too many times and it starts to sound like a noise. Then, there it was, a nudge, just a little but clear as day. I rushed it, tore away the cellophane and opened it, and of course it was empty, and I'd accidentally ripped off part of the print, just a corner where the lion was. I thought about lying to Jonah, but I knew better. Not only did he deserve the truth, but there were cameras to tell the full story. Not that I didn't think he'd believe me, but because it didn't matter. No matter if the chest moved or not, I'd messed up. I met Jonah in the parking lot on the way to the office. He carried a much too formal suitcase and a copy of today's paper. I caught up and told him flat out what I'd seen. The moving chest and the subsequent unwrapping. Jonah nodded, then wielded his newspaper like a judge's gavel. "Henry," he said, "you're still the perfect man for the job. I know you are, and I want to help you." "Then tell me what's going on," I begged. "Tell me I'm not crazy." "How about this?" he said. "You heard about the storm?" It had been the talk of the week. A storm brewing over the weekend, with the brunt of it hitting later that evening. The sky had already darkened. We had a last-minute cancellation, and I got no one to help. If you can keep things in check this one night, I'll see what I can do. "Can do about what?" I asked. "What can you do?" "Henry, please. he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "I'll see what I can do." I agreed. Things were going to be a bit different that evening. I was the only one on site, and there'd be no one to call for backup. That and the storm was guaranteed trouble. We had to close the fans and lock down the shelves with plastic straps. And because the fans weren't running, I'd have to wear a mask with a gas filter just in case the fumes got too intense. I was gonna have to make sure everything was secure, which would be an effort and a half. Not even an hour into my shift, I started getting warnings about rolling blackouts in the area due to fallen trees cutting the power lines. 30 more minutes and it reached me. The entire warehouse turned dark with the sudden click. The silence was so palpable that I could hear my heart beat. It's surprising just how many noises are around you even when it's quiet. You kinda don't notice unless the power is gone. As the power went out, I could hear the wind picking up. It was pushing into our ventilation, making the warehouse fans squeak in protest. And with the first lightning strike, I heard the shelves rattle. Not because the ground shook, but because they suddenly moved. I checked the straps on the shelves with a flashlight, trying to figure out what had made them move. I noticed a particular chest on the mid-level that had slipped a bit, and I pushed it back in line. That was the one to keep an eye on. But as the second lightning strike collapsed into the woods outside, the shelves rattled again. And when thunder started to roll, I looked up. It wasn't just one peculiar chest. They were all moving. Some of them were actively fighting against the protective straps. Others seemed to shake like a leaf in the wind. It's like something had kicked them, forced them into action. A couple of lids flipped up, revealing the empty insides. I could hear the cellophane stretch and strain against some unseen force pushing the chests every which way. Then voices. What's happening? Who's there? Is it danger? I tried my best, I really did. I tried to ignore the movement and the whispers. I tried keeping them all still and secure, but one strap on the far end of the warehouse came undone, and one persistent gust of wind made the entire thing lean. I could see that it was about to fall long before I got there. It crashed into another shelf who bore the brunt of the weight, and luckily it held. But one chest on the far end got loose. It collapsed to the floor and splintered on the concrete. Something leaked out of it. It looked like a water-oil mixture, and it had this intense smell of old fruit. I grabbed what remained of the lid and moved it, only to see a small, translucent hand sticking out. No bigger than my thumb. Little claws curled around the fingertips. It was so white I could see its veins where a pulse ought to twitch. But it didn't. It lay still. I let the lid go and backed away. "We die," a chest whispered. "We're dying," said another. "Mother, call for Mother." "Mother," they hissed and rattled. Every chest on every shelf. And as the hissing got louder, it turned into a wail, a cry for help, drowning into the raging storm. I backed away, not knowing what to do. A couple of straps were coming undone. Some shelves were swaying in the wind. And right there on the floor lay that splintered chest like a broken egg. "I'm trying to help," I called out. "I can help. Just please stop and I'll help." "The Death Man," a chest hissed. "Fear the Death Man. Mother, Mother." The calls got louder. A chant for Mother, for something to come help them, to deal with the Death Man. I couldn't stay. Defying the storm, I rushed out of the warehouse and into the parking lot. I was drenched in seconds as the rain fell sideways, but I much preferred the howling storm to whatever was happening on those shelves. I couldn't believe it. I ran for my car. I had to call Jonah. I'd gotten about 30 feet when I noticed something on the road ahead. It looked like an oncoming flash flood. Mud and trees and bushes being swept up into a big pile roiling its way across the road. It was far off, but there was something about it. It looked out of place. I stopped for a second to look a little closer. It had eyes. It wasn't oozing across the road, it was crawling like a massive reptile. I'd mistaken its scales for tree bark. It was a creature, an unreal reptilian thing, and it was coming straight at me. And now that I looked at it, it was fast. I never made it to my car. I turned back to the warehouse. I sprinted as fast as my legs would allow and slammed the door shut behind me. 2 seconds later, the door imploded with a metallic twang, hitting me in the shin bone and sending me sprawling to the floor. "Mother!" the chests cried. "Mother comes! Mother saves. Mother eats the death man. Eat the death man." Something groaned. It sounded like a tree bending in the wind, but there was a tune to it, and it repeated like the croak of an angry frog. The living mudslide reached into the warehouse only to reveal a 5-clawed forelimb, each claw the size of my leg. It cracked the floor like wet sand. Then a roar. The air rippled and the pressure made my ears pop long before I even heard its sound. It was part hiss, part croak, and part shriek, all wrapped into one furious bellow that rattled the windows. I got back up on my feet, wobbling from the gash in my leg just as the thing reached the loading bay doors. Those are solid metal. I thought they'd hold for a while, but they bent wide open with little effort. It was like watching a rabid dog tear into a pillow fort. The storm spilled onto the warehouse floor. The wind shook the shelves as the creature stopped in front of the broken chest. A split white tongue tasted the air, each segment the size of a grown man's thighs. It poked around the splinters and looked up with a pupil the size of a bowling ball. "Kill the death man," one demanded. "Kill him now." "Mother, mother." A bellow rolled out of that thing like a revving engine. I saw claws sink into the concrete as it dragged itself forward, heading my way. I hobbled into the main office. I could hear that thing thrashing around, trying to follow me. For a second it stopped. I thought maybe the door was too small for it. Then I heard a scratching noise like construction tools being dragged across the wall. It was gonna break the entire room. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I could make a run for it, but that thing would be on me in seconds out in the open. I had to keep stalling it, but I didn't know how. It was protecting something young and small, hidden within the chests. "I don't know what to do," I gasped. "I don't know what to do." I thought about Jill and not seeing her again. About never answering her last text, only for her to see my name in the obituaries. Then, a chime, a ringtone. Jonah had an extra phone in his top desk drawer, a cheap disposable flip phone, and it was ringing. I pulled it out and answered, gasping for air as my eyes flicked back and forth. Jonah's voice came through from the other side. "Henry," he said, "I'm sorry it came to this." "What is this?" I gasped. "What do I do? Where do we go when we're scared, Henry? Where are we safe?" "That's what I'm asking," I yelled back. "What do I do? Think, Henry, where are you safe?" I blinked. My mind snapped to attention and I looked around the room. And there, by the window, was the broken freezer. I climbed into it, hiding beneath a pile of merchandise while the storm raged outside. I could hear the wall give way to tooth and claw as a primal bellow rattled the confines of the freezer. I just lay there in the dark, clutching the phone like my childhood flashlight. I calmed my breathing, listening to Jonah's voice. "Just like back in the day," he said. "What are you talking about?" Another bellow. Something bumped the freezer, making it wobble, but it didn't tip over. "She's upset with you," Jonah said. "She hasn't been socialized like the others." I didn't say anything. I just held the phone tight, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe. "I'm sorry, I didn't think it'd be this bad. I just thought they'd get a little scared from the thunder, maybe show you something, but..." Another lightning strike in the distance. Thunder roared across the sky, and the creature outside thrashed across the room, trampling the desks and breaking the cheap metal chairs. I could hear a bookshelf crash, and seconds later something smacked into the freezer. It fell over. The freezer collapsed to the side, but the lid stayed on. I had my breath knocked out of me with a violent thud, but I stifled my wheezing behind a handful of shirts. "Stay still," Jonah whispered. "Do nothing." I heard massive lips smacking as something wet dragged across the freezer like sandpaper. "She doesn't know you're a nurturing man," Jonah said. "She's mourning." I thought about Jill. And with death staring me in the face, I knew the answer to the question Jonah had asked me on that first day. I was a nurturing man. I had been all along, and if I could get out of there in one piece, I'd show them. I kept my eyes closed, just like I'd done as a child. I'd pretend the world was different as chaos reigned outside, that they were play fighting or throwing pies like circus clowns. I thought back on those moments in the dark where I'd been an astronaut, ready to set off to distant planets, to make friends with alien life. Or the moments when I'd read aloud from some comic book I'd bought with my monthly allowance. A white tongue slipped through the lid of the freezer, tasting the air. A waft of warm swamp breath swept over me as the creature snorted, looking for my scent. But that freezer smelled more like Jonah than me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry. I'll do better. I'm sorry." "I know," Jonah whispered back. "You're still God's little miracle, Henry. We both are." Another low, rumbling bellowing. This one rippled through my body as if softening me up for a bite. The tongue protruded again, missing the sweat top of my head by mere inches. Then it stepped back. It dragged itself across the floor, pulling half the office along in a sudden U-turn. Order slips and receipts stuck to its scales, whipping around in the wind. Debris from broken desks and flattened chairs clung to it, floating along like a natural disaster. I lay there, tucked among the battered merchandise, listening to the howling storm. The worst had passed, and the warehouse chests were quiet. "I'm so proud of you," Jonah sighed. "So proud of what you've become." And I would stay there until dawn with Jonah, waiting for the wind to stop yelling. Most of the damage was covered by insurance. This part of the county was apparently prone to floods, it seemed, which was one of the reasons it was so cheap. Of course, there was no flood, but I got the sense that they knew that. I met Jonah a couple of days later on a park bench not too far from the warehouse. He was having yogurt and brought a thermos of piping hot coffee. We hadn't spoken since that night, but he seemed just as cheery as always. I wasn't. I need to know what this is, I said. All of this. He looked up at me, then back down at his yogurt, mango flavor. I never lied to you, he said. The Tapex is God's little miracle. We just make sure they grow up to be good. They need to socialize, to listen. So you send them out to children? You hide them in chests and just let them go? It works, he said. We rarely have a problem. And what are they? In the wild, they're terrifying, Jonah shuddered. But it's like with dogs. They can be your best friend or roam in packs looking for prey. So that big thing was a wild one. Not wild one, he corrected. A poorly socialized one. Then what do the good ones look like? Jonah finished his yogurt, putting the little plastic spoon down. He wiped his lips and rubbed the tips of his fingers together, making a strange sound. His fingertips were solid, like sanded down bone. They can look like a good friend, Jonah said. A kind uncle, a goofy aunt, or a friendly boss who don't ask too many questions. Someone who knows you very well. I looked at him, past the horn-rimmed glasses and the calming smile. There was a tint to his eyes that I hadn't seen before and a slight protrusion along his spine. It's not without purpose, Henry, he said. We're all just trying to be better people. He got up and stretched a little, then let his demeanor sink back into a familiar expression. See you Monday, he asked for the cleanup. I got up, looked him over, and shook his hand. See you Monday. It's been a few years since. The first thing I did after that meeting was call Jill. It didn't take long for us to reconnect. She gave me every opportunity to back out, but I kept at it. And beyond all my insecurities and questions and worries was a life of calm and warmth. One that I could nurture into something beautiful. A place with bedtime reading and early morning car karaoke. You might be surprised to know that I still work with little miracles. We got one of the chests at home. The creature that lived in it slipped out last summer, having grown too large to stay in the double-bottom floor. I don't consider these things a threat any more than I do a stray dog or an outdoors cat. I get it now. I get how they work. And I don't have to wear any headphones at work. They don't mind me hearing the voices. Jonah has never said it out loud, but I think he and I both know where we first met. He's been with me for a long time, all the way back to when I read books by flashlight. Thanks to him, I guess someone listened to all those times when I whispered into the dark. It's a good reminder that God loves all his little miracles. And maybe we should too. Story 3 ends here. Now, listen closely to Story 4. Are you okay? As the days of my life draw to a close, I feel the need to explain the events that brought me here. I've told this story hundreds of times since it happened, and no one believes me. I wouldn't believe it either if I'm being honest. And that's why I feel it needs to be told. Be prepared. This may sound like the ramblings of a madman. I'm writing this as a warning to anyone who likes to experiment with substances. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't do weird drugs. My friends and I like drugs, not the hard stuff. We'd smoke weed, take mushrooms, drop acid. I got really into it. We were like modern-day hippies, long hair, comfortable clothes, no real plans. We always had fun. I never felt like I was in danger. I had issues, sure, but I dealt with them in my own way. It was always me, Brian, and Roger. We'd known each other since school. None of us had done much with our lives. We worked just enough to get by, lived for the weekend, and found comfort in our little bubble. One night I drove over to Brian's for our usual weekend routine. Parked, grabbed my bag, walked in. Brian had a nice setup, big TV, tons of video games, surround sound speakers that made every movie feel real. I let myself in. Brian was already on the couch watching TV. "Hey, man," he said. "Drive go all right?" "Yeah, man, I'm ready to party." "Hell yeah, got a surprise for us tonight," he said, pulling out a tiny plastic baggie. Inside were 6 small black pills. "Man, you know I don't mess with pills. What is this?" "Trust me, I took 2 last night. It was the best time of my life. Felt like I was a unicorn." "A unicorn? You serious? How long did it last?" "That's the crazy part. Felt like 12, 14 hours, but when I came down, it had only been 10 minutes. Bullshit." He looked fine, alive, seemed normal. I gave in. The doorbell rang. "Must be Roger," Brian said, heading for the door. Roger stumbled in, drunk. He looked at the pills and laughed. Thought they'd be bigger. He was in a good mood. Said he was getting back with his girlfriend. Happier than I'd seen him in a while. He was sad for a long time. Brian explained the pills. How the room turned into open countryside, how he became a unicorn, how free it felt. I listened, but at some point all these stories start to blend together. We dimmed the lights, turned on the TV, and put on music. Brian handed us each 2 pills and a glass of water. We took them. At first, the soft music and TV made me feel good. We laughed, talked, chilled. Roger reminded us of old times we spent together. We talked about Mrs. Hinkle's class, our first job at the diner, and chasing ladies in our short tenure at college. It was nice before things got weird. Roger got up and went to the bathroom. When he came back, his pupils were huge. He just stood there staring. "You okay?" I asked. "This is crazy, man," he said. Then Brian had to pee. I heard the flush. Suddenly, I had to go too. Brian came back with glassy eyes and lay down on the couch. I walked past Roger. He was drooling. The piss felt euphoric, like letting go of everything. When I came out of the bathroom, Roger was face down on the floor. But the floor wasn't carpet anymore. It was metal, cold, hard, industrial. It smelled like oil. "Are you okay?" I asked. "He's fine," Brian said. Said it felt like marshmallows. "Why is everything made of metal?" "It's not, man. Just relax." I realized I was high and collapsed on the couch, closing my eyes. I saw colors I didn't recognize. I saw monkeys running through a jungle. Bright green leaves, vines. I swung like Tarzan. I felt like a king. Then I got scared. I opened my eyes, and I was walking out of the bathroom again. Roger was on the floor. The room was black this time. Still smelled like oil. The walls weren't right. "Are you okay?" I asked. "He's fine," Brian said. "Didn't I tell you to relax? Didn't we already have this conversation?" Brian smiled. "You've been standing there a while. Why don't you lie down?" "Okay." I lay next to him and closed my eyes. This time it was darker. A room with no lights. A loud ringing in my ears. I felt small. I wanted a girlfriend like Roger. I wanted to be back in the jungle. Then I opened my eyes, and I was walking out of the bathroom again. Roger was on the floor. He looked scared this time. "Are you okay?" "He's fine, bro. I'm starting to worry about you. Didn't I say that already?" "Yeah." I got on the couch and shut my eyes. I saw demons. I opened them again. Everything was black. The light was gone. I stepped out and asked about Roger. Roger's eyes were red. So were Brian's. "Are you okay?" Fuck you, Roger, Brian snapped. You're always drunk. Your girlfriend should have left you, and fuck you for always worrying about him. I didn't understand the anger. They charged me, grunting, snarling like animals, lifeless eyes. I ran up the stairs. Stop chasing me, please. Alexa, call 911. I threw a Voss. Nothing. I locked myself in the bathroom. Silence. Scratching at the door. They charged it, slammed into it. Silence. I opened the door and peeked out. They were standing there. Red eyes. Roger looked worse with his gray skin, mouth twitching. They charged again. Tore through my skin. I bled. I screamed. Then I was back in the basement. Roger was on the floor. Brian is on the couch. It felt real but wrong. Are you okay? I asked. They attacked me again like chimps. I ran, through the Voss, locked the bathroom door. Alexa, call 911. Please. They scratched at the door, punched it. I cried. I just wanted to go home. A knock. This is the police. We got a 911 call. Is everything all right? Help! Help me! They're killing me! I heard yelling. Then gunshots. Relief. They knocked. It's okay, someone said. I opened the door. Red eyes. The cop lunged. He bit me, punched me. I screamed and woke up in the basement again, the real basement. Blue carpet, normal light, no oil. I stepped out of the bathroom. Roger wasn't on the floor. Bro, are you okay? Brian asked. What happened to you? You're covered in blood, said Roger. He looked scared. Roger stepped toward me. I thought he was attacking. I grabbed the lamp. I smashed his face in. Holy shit, bro, Brian shouted. You're with me. It's okay. I punched him, ran upstairs. Alexa, call 911. I hid in the bathroom. I heard Roger moaning. Brian trying to help him. This wasn't real. It was never going to be real again. I lay on the tile floor and cried. Brian knocked. Bro, Roger's hurt bad. You smashed my mirror. You're bleeding everywhere. Fuck you, I'm not falling for it. Another knock. This is the police. What's going on in there? We got a 911 call. Get in here now, Brian shouted. He explained everything. How we took drugs, how I hurt myself, how I hurt Roger. This time it was really the police. They arrested me for assault, and Brian for distributing narcotics. They tested the pills, couldn't identify them, said they'd never seen anything like it. I passed out in the cop car. When I woke up, I told them what I told you. They didn't believe me, said I was strung out, said I didn't know up from down. My lawyer said I wouldn't be held responsible. Responsible for what? I asked. You killed your buddy with that lamp. I wanted to die. Brian went to jail. The state blamed him. They said I was a victim. I didn't feel like one. I spent a lot of time with Roger's family. They didn't blame me. I did. Ever since that night, every time I close my eyes, I see Roger face down on the floor. He always looks happy. Are you okay? I ask. Just fine, he says. Feels like marshmallows. I ain't mad at you. I'll see you real soon, Roger, real soon.